A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
A new initiative to introduce today. It's called Next Gen Disciples and is under the umbrella of the global organisation of Every Home for Christ. Greg Bondar leads Every Home for Christ in Australia these days, and he has a protege who is going to be leading what's called Next Gen Disciples. Her name is Jemima Ayoub. Jemima is a law student at the University of Notre Dame. First of all, I'll especially welcome you, Greg Bondar. Welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Delighted to be with you as usual.
And Jemima, a special welcome to you.
Thank you.
Greg, this new initiative, and we know that Every Home for Christ, a global organisation, you're in countries all around the world, a huge vision to be able to take the gospel to every home in the whole world. Give us your insights here into what's happening with this new initiative.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Look, as you know, the mission of Every Home for Christ is to reach everyone, everywhere, every generation. Now, to do that, Neil, we have to make sure that the foundation of Christianity, if it's to survive, needs to be placed into the hands of the youth. So what we thought here was, what better way to do that than to start a youth program where the next gen disciples can go out there and get the youth involved if we're going to try and get the Great Commission to be active and then get the gospel to everyone, everywhere, and every generation now.
And this is where you come in, Jemima, because I'm sure there's listeners listening all over Australia, whether it's cities or country towns, and saying, how can a new initiative for youth work and actually be something like a national youth movement? How are you anticipating things are going to look?
Well, we have been blessed to be in a generation where communication with people who are far away has never been easier. So we could implement several initiatives, including those that are online and within local communities, to connect youth around Australia, especially Christian youth who seem to have minimal engagement with other young Christians, which could strengthen them in their faith and also encourage them to spread their faith to those who don't have it. So it could be, there's several opportunities that can be taken advantage of in order to spread the gospel to young people and to strengthen existing young Christians in their faith.
Jemima, yourself, and you've got a co-leader of this new initiative, Leon Karatzis, and you've got this vision together to be able to connect people. And it's interesting because you're not planning to do some sort of flashing lights and loud music for your youth group, because the sort of background you have, you're a law student at the University of Notre Dame, and you've already got a background in research and administration and content creation and even political research here. Is there going to be something special along the lines of your gifting that's going to colour this youth movement?
As you've said, I do have a background in law, so I'm very analytical. So it has given me the ability to look at a situation and be able to brainstorm the most effective ways of doing things. As you've said, it won't be flashing lights. It'll be very productive. It will focus primarily on productivity in its ability to engage young people to network together and spread the love of Christ, the knowledge of Christ with each other in the most efficient way possible.
I'm wondering whether you can let us in on your own insights as to where you think the youth of Australia are at, because a lot of people will be saying there's not many youth in my church. Is there a generation we're missing here, and what might be motivating you?
Yeah, as you said, unfortunately, churches are seeing a massive decline in young people within their congregations, and I think that's very tragic. There are several possible explanations for that, but youth retention in church is a concern that every Christian ought to have. one of the, if you look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, at the latest census, it was suggested that there are more Christian Gen Zers, which are people aged 12 to 25, than millennials, which is the generation before us. So there is an increased interest in Christianity, even if there isn't an increased practice, and that's what we seek to remedy. We want to re-engage people who are open to Christianity or who already practice the faith to come and do so in a more consistent manner with other young people. Iron sharpens iron. So if young people encourage each other to rejoin their own church, it'll be more efficient than any other measure in our view.
What are you envisaging? That there'll be groups that will connect with you initially, I guess, online, and then for those groups to be a part of local churches around the nation? How do you see things looking?
Yeah, as you've said, it will probably start off online, and then those groups could begin to meet in person as they grow over time, and it will become a national project.
And the sorts of issues that you're clearly interested in, given that you've already honed some of your skills, even in political research, a research assistant for a member of the New South Wales Parliament, those sorts of ethical issues, where do you think young people sit with those? A pursuit of truth, a pursuit of understanding where our nation's heading?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of young people don't seem to pursue truth, goodness and beauty in anything, let alone Christ. And that's something we really want to remedy through this project. I think when it comes to ethical issues, as you've mentioned, they stem from a worldview. So our primary goal is to enforce that Christian worldview. And then once the foundation of Christianity is imposed on young people, then their faith and love for Christ will encourage them to go and speak out on ethical issues. So I think speaking out on ethical issues, although it's good, it's fairly vain if there is no worldview behind it that will influence that decision.
So you're motivated by bringing a Christian worldview into a next-gen youth movement. Now, your own background here, because your own faith is deeply rooted in your family raising you, and your father is a pastor. Describe for us where your background is.
So, yeah, I've been a pastor's kid my whole life. I went through a very turbulent faith journey, but thankfully Christ found me, and I have been a Christian for the past year and a half. The joy and actual fulfillment Christ gives the individual from my own experience is something that I'd like to share with the whole world, because if you have something so great, why wouldn't you want to share it?
And you're trying to create a hub. Now, this is an interesting way of thinking about the formation of a youth movement. You've got the resources of Every Home for Christ behind you, and so there's a reputation that goes decade upon decade, and there's even global stories, no doubt, that you'll become aware of as things get established as to how these things are happening around the world. Is there something that, if you're a part of an Australian movement, there's important things to understand about being part of a global movement?
Yeah, as you've said, Every Home for Christ is an incredible organisation that goes around the globe. Being part of the Australian movement will innately put somebody as part of the global movement too. Now, Christ's Great Commission was about the whole world, so being part of the Australian movement will help in the fulfilment of that Great Commission, both in Australia and around the world. But as you said, they're all interconnected.
Let me bring Greg back into the conversation here, because, Greg, Every Home for Christ, well connected with churches all around Australia. Is this where you would hope that there's going to be some ways that there can be collaboration, connection, and part of this new movement?
Oh, absolutely. Now, look, as you know, Every Home for Christ wants to get the gospel to everyone, everywhere, every generation. Now, to do that, what we want to do is to empower the church to continue their mission. So, yes, there's a big connection, and the whole idea of the Next Gen Disciples is to really get the youth back to church, get everybody back to church, but we need to make sure that people can connect. Now, Jemima and Leon are fantastic advocates and ambassadors for Youth for Christ, in many ways. So what we're doing really here is trying to get the youth back and to connect with the churches, which is what we're trying to do as well. And so there's a real alliance there, Neil, for want of a better word,
I cannot get out of my head the significant figures, because every Home for Christ is so well established around the world that one of the things that happens on a global scale is that 200,000 houses in villages in countries around the world will be visited today, and another 200,000 tomorrow. And so even while people might not be so familiar with every Home for Christ in Australia, this is the sort of momentum, this is the sort of impetus that you want to bring to the movement as you're working here in Australia.
Absolutely, Neil. You know that the generational change is happening. Look, I'm a baby boomer, Neil, for want of a better phrase, although I feel much younger than a baby boomer. But we've got to now identify, Neil, with the younger generation and get them on board to carry the cross to everyone, everywhere, Neil.
And so when we're talking about a new movement, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're talking about next-gen disciples. The sort of thing that you want to provide is the type of leadership to inspire a new generation. This is where Jemima comes in, and of course her offsider, who's also going to be part of this, Leon. This sort of movement for a new generation, and backed by the resources of Every Home for Christ.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. And I should mention that it was Jemima as a youth that sort of encouraged me to get this going. And I said, Jemima, you're in charge. It's your youth leadership. And it's very much coming from the youth, Neil. And I think that's so encouraging, because you and I both know that we're getting on, the generation is changing. And we need people like Jemima and Leon to come on board and carry the cross into the future.
Well, Jemima, wonderful to connect with you, and I hope you'll keep us in the loop as there are some developments. These are early stages, but it is a fabulous organisation that you're connected to, Every Home for Christ, and this new movement that is just beginning, just being launched, Next Gen Disciples. And Jemima Ayoub, Aoub, is going to be the youth leader, along with her offsider, Leon Karatzis. To connect with this new youth movement, here's the website, everyhomeforchrist.org.au. everyhomeforchrist.org.au to connect with Jemima. And I'm sure, Jemima, you wouldn't mind hearing from people. I'm sure you'll want to get some supporters on board as well. So everyhomeforchrist.org.au. To you, Greg Bondar, thank you for being with us once again today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil.
And Jemima, thank you for being with us on 2020.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.